So, one of the cars that I have always been sort of infatuated with, and it's not a supercar, it's not something that's made of unobtainium, it's the Pontiac Trans Am, and specifically the late 70s era Pontiac Trans Ams, mainly for one reason, and that reason is Smokey and the Bandit. I'm probably not alone in that. I think a lot of people grew up with that movie and they love the fun of it, they love the rebellious nature of it, they love the chemistry of Sally Field and Burt Reynolds on screen. Certainly, that Trans Am, though, is a character as much as anybody else is in that film. I knew for sure that when we started working on a documentary about the birthplace of the F body, which the very first Firebird Trans Am ever rolled off the line, which was the Norwood Assembly in Norwood, Ohio, I knew that I wanted somehow to bring Smokey and the Bandit into that story. A lot of people think that, that's a Hollywood-made movie. Those cars must have been West Coast cars. That was probably all shot out in LA. And there was a sister plant to the Norwood plant. It was Van Nuys, California, where if you were shooting that for, as a Hollywood production in the Hollywood Hills or somewhere around in that area, you probably would have gotten cars that came from the Van Nuys plant. However, a lot of people don't realize that that movie was actually shot in Georgia. And there were two plants that made Camaros and Firebirds at the time. Norwood being the only plant that continuously made Camaros and Firebirds through the run of when that plant was operational, from the time the F-body came out to the time that that plant was shut down in 1987. That was not the only car they made, but that was the majority of the cars they made, and they continuously made them, where the Van Nuys plant had stopped production on the F-bodies for a while and made some other cars mixed in as well when the F-body was shut down on the Van Nuys line. Getting back to the Smokey and the Bandit connection, I knew for sure that I needed some incorporation of Smokey and the Bandit into this documentary. We were telling the story of the plant where the legendary Firebird Trans Am, the 77 in Smokey and the Bandit, which actually turns out it was a 76 Trans Am with a 77 front end put on it. When they filmed the film, the 77s were not out yet, but they made it look like the new model that was coming out. We wanted to have that be part of the story as well, because that movie catapulted sales of the Trans Am. I believe for most of the time at that plant, it was maybe 1 or 2 Firebirds for every 5 Camaros that were made. Right after the release of that movie, it became even. And in fact, I think there were even some periods where Trans Ams were actually being made in higher numbers than Camaros, and a few blips on the data graph. My dream was to talk to the Bandit himself. I wanted to talk to Burt Reynolds, and I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I was going to do everything that was legally, humanly possible to get in front of Burt Reynolds to get something from him about this film that he had created that inspired millions of kids to love that car. I thought there maybe could be some relevance to our larger story in the documentary. I didn't know if he had ever visited the plant or what his interest was, but I did hear that he was a bit of a car guy. That wasn't just a film role that he was in. He loved cars. That was part of the attraction of that story. Him and Hal Needham, of course, were kind of the driving force, pun intended, behind that movie. And without Hal Needham's story and without Burt Reynolds' star power, that movie would have never been made. So it really took the both of them to get that film done. I had gotten a tip from a friend that there's an event called the Bandit Run that happens every year. And I had read about this event before. I think it started back maybe in the early 2000s. I can't remember the exact time frame that it actually had started. But the idea behind it was that Smokey and the Bandit fans would gather every year and they would commemorate the route from Texarkana to Atlanta, like in Smokey and the Bandit. And I thought, okay, this is great. I've got to get involved with this somehow. But, life happens. I had kids, I had mortgage, I had work. Just things kind of got in the way every year, and I never was really able to do it. But I got a tip from a friend of mine that said, hey, the Bandit Run is actually going to be coming through the Cincinnati area. After they had done that route from Smokey and the Bandit for several years, they actually decided that they were going to vary it and change it every year to make it something a little bit different every year. So they started doing routes around different parts of the country. And around the time that we were shooting material for this documentary, they were doing like a Midwestern route. And they were doing one stopover in Cincinnati. So I thought, well, this is great. I'm going to go and talk with some people on the Bandit Run. Maybe somebody there will know Burt Reynolds. Maybe he's got some kind of association with this. I went to the hotel where the Bandit Runners were stopping over, showed up with a camera, totally unannounced, and just on the fly said, hey, here's the story I'm telling. I'm telling the story about the birthplace of the Firebird Trans Am. First Firebird Trans Am rolled off the line in 1969 at the Norwood plant. I want to find out why you love this car so much. Why are you taking this route across the Midwest this year in your car, in your collector car? Why are you out driving it, putting miles on it with all these other crazy Trans Am fans? And people loved it. Everybody loves to talk about their babies. And for these people, their cars are their babies. So we had no problem getting people to talk to us. Talked to one guy and he was like, hey, let me introduce you to the people that run this thing. So I said, oh, that's great. So I went and talked to them, told them what I was doing. They were like, oh, this is pretty cool. I like it. You should talk to this other guy. So I go and talk to this other guy. Gene Kennedy was his name, and he was actually associated with the Burt Reynolds Institute, which is Burt Reynolds Acting Institute that he had. Burt Reynolds was passionate about a lot of different things. I think he was passionate about cars. He was certainly passionate about ladies, but he really was passionate about acting. A lot of people, they see sort of the hammy side of Burt Reynolds, the star power that he had in movies, but one of the loves that he had in his life really was this art and craft of acting. So he started the Burt Reynolds Institute to serve up-and-coming actors, give them a place that they could come and play and work on their craft and become better actors. So the Bandit run was actually started by a couple of guys, Dave Hershey and Dave Hall, who were big Smokey and the Bandit fans, of course. Dave Hall has a pretty amazing shop, Restore a Muscle Car, where they restore all kinds of things, but Trans Ams, Firebirds, that's kind of the thing that brought him to prominence and the thing that he really focused on to build that company. In talking with them, they introduced me to this guy, Gene Kennedy, who was also on the Bandit run that year, and he was associated with the Burt Reynolds Institute, and said, Mr. Reynolds is a really big car guy. I think he would really like this story. We should get you guys together. And I said, yes, please. That sounds fantastic. You read my mind. I don't even have to ask. You're offering this. This is great. So at this point, I'm just over the moon. Like, oh my gosh, this is great. I get to talk with all these great people, get these great interviews for the film, and it looks like I'm actually going to get an interview with Burt Reynolds, one of my childhood idols. Gene gives me his information, his contact info, and says, yeah, just get in touch with me. We'll get something set up. Well, after the Bandit run, everyone, went back home. Everyone gets busy. Gene has a business himself where he does a lot of automotive movie car gatherings and events. And at the time, he was associated with the Burt Reynolds Institute as well. So he was very busy with that. Many, many calls later, many, many emails later, I never got anything back from him. The first few months, I was like, everyone's busy. I get it. Going on 6 months, I was like, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. But again, I said I was determined to make this happen through any means necessary that I could legally do. So I just stayed on him. I stayed contacting him. I didn't take it personally. I said, he's a busy guy. He's got a lot of stuff going on. I'm just not a priority. And that's okay. I understand. Next year rolls around and 2017 actually turned out to be that was the 40th anniversary for Smokey and the Bandit. So I thought, okay, I'm not having any luck following up, getting something set up outside of the Bandit run, but I had pretty good luck last year just kind of breaking into the Bandit run and just seeing what I could get. So if there's any way that this is actually going to happen, I'm just going to go on the Bandit run next year, and I'm hoping that with it being the 40th anniversary, Burt Reynolds is actually going to show up on the Bandit run. This was my hope. So my dad and I actually signed up for the Bandit run. I wanted this to be an experience he and I could have together. He owned a 69 Camaro that was kind of his baby. It was his first new car. It was certainly an impactful car for me as a child. That's kind of what got me interested in the automotive hobby and just automotive stuff in general. So this was a Trans Am culture, very closely connected with Camaro culture, although if you ask a Camaro guy and a Trans Am guy, they're probably going to say, nope, there's a big dividing line there, but they're both F-bodies. Jokingly, a lot of people say that dividing line's pretty wide, but it's really not. There's certainly a lot of cross-cultural interest between Camaro lovers and Firebird lovers. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to make this a father-son experience. My dad was excited to do it. We loaded up. I had a 79 Trans Am, not a show car by any means. This was a pretty rough example. It looked good from about 30, 40 feet away. It had a bad paint job before. It didn't even have the hood bird. It had some racing stripes over it, some big tires on the back. Somebody on the Bandit run actually put it to me really well. They were looking at the car. They looked under the hood. There was wiring kind of everywhere. And he said, man, it looks like every redneck with a pocket knife's had their hand on this thing. And that was pretty much the character of the car. But it was my car, and it was going to go on the Bandit run with us. So we crammed as much film gear as we could fit in the back. Turned out that we ended up having to leave our cameras and some of the other gear that we had just because it just wouldn't fit. Even if it did fit, it was so heavy that the leaking air shocks that were in the back all the weight in the trunk was bottoming the car out so that it was rubbing on the tires. We couldn't even get out of the driveway without the scraping sound of the body cutting into the tires. So we had to shed weight. So we pull the camera gear out, pull the lighting out. And I said, you know what? If we're lucky enough to get in front of Mr. Reynolds, I will find a camera somewhere. So we go on the run. First night of the run, we go to the host hotel. We're hanging out. And I still had my contact. I still had his number. And I call him when we get to the hotel. And he did pick up this time. And I said, hey, Mr. Kennedy, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I had talked with you on the Bandit Run last year, thinking like, okay, Bandit Run this year, this is probably, he's in that frame of mind. Remind him of who I am. Oh, yeah, I remember you. Okay, well, I'm in a crowded restaurant right now. I'll call you back in just a couple of minutes. We're wrapping up. I'll call you back in about 20 minutes. Okay, no problem. Hangs up the phone. 20 minutes go by, no call. 25 minutes go by, no call. 30 minutes go by, no call. 40 minutes go by, no call. So I'm like, okay, he's a busy guy. I'm not a high priority. I get it. There's no problem on my end. I understand. So I start thinking, okay, what's the next step? How am I going to get this to happen? I've either got to insert myself in a way where it's either going to be easier to say fine, or they're going to tell me to leave. And I was willing to take that chance. So we just went to the lobby of the hotel where I assumed he was probably staying. It was the host hotel for the Bandit Run. And I just waited. I just waited until he came back through the lobby because I knew he had been out at dinner. At least that's what he said on the phone. So sure enough, after about an hour and a half, he came walking in with some friends and they were standing there talking. And I just went up, put my hand on his shoulder and said, hey, it's good to see you, Mr. Kennedy. You don't have to call me anymore because I'm right here. We can just go ahead and talk about all this right now. So at that point, I see this look of, oh, I'm trapped. Like, this guy has got me. I have to talk to him. Conversation, very quickly, very politely, I say, all I want is just a few minutes to talk with Mr. Reynolds if that opportunity exists. I won't be a nuisance. I can give you the question list in advance. I would just love 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes of his time if possible. After a big sigh, okay, let me see what I can do. So this gives me some hope. At this point, he had said, let me see what I can do for tomorrow. I'll see if I can arrange a few minutes because he is on the run. He is going to be here tomorrow. If I can get 5 or 10 minutes with you tomorrow at such and such a time, will you be ready? Absolutely. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh my good God, I've left all my camera gear at home. I don't have anything to shoot. By this point, I was able to call a rental company right before they closed and said, can you overnight me a camera? Can you get me something? I need a camera. I've got a little bit of lighting with me. I just need a camera and a microphone. If you can get me that by tomorrow, if you can overnight it, I will pay you whatever the rate is. Just name the price. So they actually were able to get something out overnight. The FedEx guy, I believe, was there on the phone. So they got something in a box, threw it to me. I had rented a lot of stuff from them in the past. So I had a good relationship with them. They got it to me. I got it at the hotel the next morning and we went over and sure enough, I was able to get in the room with Burt Reynolds, sit across from him and talk to him and just ask him some stories. That 5 to 10 minute interview that I was promised actually turned into about a 45-minute conversation. And at the end, he said, well, what else do you want to know about? And I was so starstruck and just so, over the moon at this point. I felt kind of bad because I had run out of questions to ask him. Now, if you had asked me the next day, what are some other things you want to talk to Burt Reynolds about? Oh, I could have thought of probably a million things, but I was pretty focused on getting the content for this interview, for the documentary. Long story short, we got the interview. We did everything that we could to make it happen. And I did have to be annoying to somebody. They did basically say, okay, we're just going to appease him so he'll go away, but it worked. It was truly amazing. That is definitely a highlight of my life. They say don't meet your idols because you're going to be disappointed, but I have to say with Burt Reynolds, I was not disappointed at all. He was super gracious. He was so appreciative of the fan base that he had through Smokey and the Bandit. There was a time in his life where he said, I kind of resented this. I felt like this was all I was being known for. But I think as he matured and he aged and kind of realized that some actors go their whole career and they're not really ever known for anything, he was just really appreciative that he had a strong fan base that loved him. And he's certainly known for other great movies as well. But, Smokey and the Bandit, I think, is probably the thing that everyone knows him from and that everyone loves him in. And he was just excited to be a part of it. He was excited to be involved with the whole crowd. Just the energy that people brought, I think, brought him a lot of energy. And we felt very fortunate. He sadly passed the next year, but we found out that this was actually one of the last interviews he did on that topic. This was one of the last times he actually went out in public and did interviews. So again, just incredibly fortunate to be able to have that opportunity.
Successful car purchasing is all about knowing your buying power and being able to move quickly. And the best way to do that is getting pre-qualified with Premier Financial Services. Call one of these numbers, speak to one of their representatives, fill out their application, and then you'll know exactly how much car you can buy. You'll approach a seller, tell them you're already qualified, you've got your simple lease set up from Premier Financial, and you'll be able to close very, very quickly. That's why Premier is one of the most powerful partners in the world of exotic car financing, and that's why I turn to them every time I go out and try to buy something crazy.